You're watching NASA TV.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm NASA's Gary Jordan. Thank you for joining us for our briefing to preview the next spacewalk scheduled for this Friday, January 20th, 2023, aboard the International Space Station. The spacewalk will be the 84th U.S. spacewalk to be conducted out of the Quest airlock. Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA astronaut Koichi Wakata and NASA astronaut Nicole Mann will be our spacewalkers. The two will be working on installing mounting platforms on the 1A and 1B power channels that are needed to install another pair of IROSA solar arrays on the space station during future spacewalks. This will be the first spacewalk for both Wakata and Mann. In this briefing, we'll discuss the state of the International Space Station, and pre-spacewalk preparations. We'll also walk through the detailed procedures of the January 20th spacewalk. Our briefers today include Dina Cantella, Operations Integration Manager of the International Space Station Program, Chloe Mehring, Flight Director for this spacewalk, and Keith Johnson, Lead Spacewalk Officer. As always, we'll first start with some initial remarks from each of our briefers before opening it up for questions. We'll be taking questions on our phone bridge as well as here in the room. If you're on the phone, please press *1 to be added to our queue and to ask a question. We'll now begin with opening comments from Dina Cantella. Dina.
All right, thank you, Gary, and thanks everybody for tuning in. So before we get into the details of the spacewalks, which our panel here are going to go into, I did just want to talk a little bit about operations on ISS these days because it's been really busy, and since I was last here, we've had a lot happening. I'd say multiple vehicles coming and going, and spacewalks. So I'll go into a few of those. First of all, the Northrop Grumman vehicle that launched in November. It's a cargo vehicle, NG-18. That vehicle did arrive at ISS. It had a successful rendezvous. It brought 8,200 pounds of cargo. We're happy to get those supplies on board. If you recall, it had one solar array that didn't deploy, but it was able to successfully rendezvous. And the crew's been busy unloading the cargo and packing it full of trash, and we're expecting to unberth and release it around March 1st. So a successful mission, and we're not anticipating any issues with its unberth or release due to the solar array. And then later in November, we had a SpaceX 26 cargo mission, and so SpaceX CRS-26. It was extremely successful. It's already completed its 45-day mission and splashed down last week. It was really heavy on the science, and so our scientists are extremely happy, and they got a lot of good data. Not just NASA, but all of our international partners had participation, and it was a really great mission. So just congratulations to both the Northrop Grumman and the SpaceX teams on successful missions. And we also had 3 spacewalks that have happened since November. So we had one that was an installation of some struts for the 1 Bravo channel, and this is setting us up for the IROSA EVAs that will be happening when they bring up the new arrays in June. Is what we're thinking for the SpaceX 28 mission. And so we did that EVA very successfully, and we just have a few remaining bolts to finish on that. And we also deployed both of the 2 IROSA EVAs, both of the 2 IROSAs that came up on SpaceX 26, and we had over 2 EVAs on December 3rd and December 19th. So the IROSAs deployed perfectly, and they're supplying power now. And so really, again, hats off to the team that has built those arrays, the Boeing and Redwire teams, and they're building additional arrays, like I said, for probably the June timeframe when we'll launch the next set. And so as part of the spacewalks, we typically have 4 spacesuits on board, and in this case, back last year, if you remember, we had an incident with water that had entered into the helmet of one of our crew members in March. And so we brought down one of the 4 spacesuits over the summer. We took a look at that, and as I reported in November, the team has worked through the investigation, and we're able to continue EVAs, which of course we did 3. But that had only left us with 3 spacesuits on board. And we did have another issue that came up with one of the fan pump separator units in one of the spacesuits. So for this last series of EVAs, we went into that with only 2 spacesuits, so down some redundancy. But in December, the crew and the team changed out the fan pump separator, and we're now back up to 3 of our 4 spacesuits, and SpaceX 27 will bring up another spacesuit, will bring us up to the full complement. And the spacewalks that happened in December were really successful, and in fact, we also had an issue with our 1B power channel where it was intermittently tripping off, and so we had taken it out of use, out of service. So the 1B, so basically 1/8 of our power was down for a period of time. But during one of the spacewalks, we unplugged a power cable, and that took the intermittent tripping out of the equation. It isolated the issue that we had. And so, again, we were able to add that last minute to one of the spacewalks, and it ended up highly successful. So I'm really happy with the results there. And so in the last couple of months also, the Russians had several EVAs planned, and we've had a couple of them postponed. So first they had an issue with some of the Orlan spacesuit components, but they fixed that. They were able to change those components out. But then when they started the next spacewalk, that's when we had the Soyuz coolant leak. And so that one was also postponed. And our Russian colleagues are working on their forward plans for spacewalks at this point, and when the next one will be. And so relative to the Soyuz coolant leak, there was a dedicated press conference on this last week with Joel Montalbano, our program manager, and with Sergei Krikalev, who's the Human Spaceflight Executive Director at Roscosmos. And so I don't want to turn this into a Soyuz press conference, but just wanted to give an update on that, which, so as you recall what they said last week, instead of bringing home Sergei, Dmitry, and Frank in that Soyuz where we had the coolant leak, instead, what we're going to do is Roscosmos is planning to launch an empty vehicle on February 20th, Baikonur time, and that vehicle will dock autonomously to ISS, and then that will be the new return vehicle for, again, Sergei, Dmitry, and Frank. And then the vehicle that's currently on orbit will basically be landed autonomously in Kazakhstan. So that vehicle is taken out of the equation. The update I wanted to share is that last week, Joel and Sergei had mentioned that we were looking at SpaceX Dragon as potential for a rescue vehicle between now and February 20th in case we had a contingency evacuation that was necessary. And so we looked at that, and we did decide that that is a good plan. We are planning to just move Frank Rubio's seat liner over from the Soyuz tomorrow, actually, over into the Dragon. And we think that that'll take out some of the heat load that's in the Soyuz spacecraft and will help the overall posture for us. And so the team has come up with a really good plan to provide this as an evacuation type of contingency, and we are not planning to bring Frank home down in this particular vehicle in the Dragon. So again, the plan is for Frank and Dmitry and Sergei to stay on board for several more months until they come home, probably in late September. We're looking at the exact timing of that, but at this point, that would be when the vehicle would be planned to come home. So that's the update on that, and I'll just say the rest of the flight program, because we're trying to work around the February 20th launch date for the Soyuz. We're still working on the exact dates, but we're shooting for Crew 6 to launch in mid to late February, and then Crew 5 would come home sometime a few days after that, after a direct handover. We've got a Progress vehicle, and we've got that will launch in February timeframe, and then we'll have probably in the March timeframe SpaceX 27. That's a cargo mission, and then after that we'll have a Northrop Grumman mission, NG-19. So it's a really busy time, and I just wanted to give you a quick update, but again, I'd like to refocus us on the EVA, the EVA is happening on Friday, and as Gary mentioned, the crew are Koichi Wakata and Nicole Mann. They're going to be our rookie spacewalkers. But Koichi has a lot of space experience, and I just wanted to brag on him for a moment that he surpassed his 400th day in space in late November. He's accumulated this over multiple missions, but he's really got a lot of history here. And both he and Nicole have done an outstanding job on orbit, and they're well trained and ready to go for this spacewalk. So looking forward to that. Yeah, our overall objectives, and these guys will go into a little bit more detail, but again, we're trying to set up a frame, some struts that will be used for future IROSA installation, and that's kind of the most of the spacewalk. We're finishing the tightening of the bolts on a previous set of struts that we had installed, and we're also installing a cable that would sort of allow us to route power around if a particular box, electrical box failed on the truss. So this gives us kind of an autonomous way to route power, and so that's a really important cable for us. And then there's a few get-aheads, and maybe Keith will go into this, but it's routing additional cables to prepare for other EVAs, and also we have a robotic microconical tool that we're going to go retrieve and bring back for refurbishment as well. Again, those are just if we have time, though. So the main focus is really on the struts. But that's all I had in terms of opening remarks. And so at this point, what I'm going to do is hand it off to Chloe, who is our lead flight director.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for being here today and for those of you online listening. So again, Nicole and Koichi, they are our spacewalkers. We have Koichi as EV1 and Nicole as EV2, and it is their first EVAs. We have a lot of confidence in them. They have been prepping and practicing and studying remarkably. We've been getting a lot of questions, a lot of comments from them, so we know that they're well prepared. As far as training on the mod kit, they've also been able to do this in the pool together. It was back in August of 2022. And prior to that, we do have some other specific trainers in our buildings and facilities here that they've been able to practice on. Like I said, the prep on board's been going really well. They've been very attentive. We've had two conferences with them so far, and we have one more coming up just to hash out any of the last-minute details. So the mod kits, these are required in order to install the IROSAs, or the ISS rollout solar arrays. And ISS is just a really great platform to use these solar arrays, not only to get the power on board for our payloads, but also to use them as future tech demos on other vehicles such as Gateway, or maybe another deep space type mission. So what they'll be doing is, if I can go ahead and get picture 6, we can take a look at what it looks like. So this is our current, well, almost current picture of station. We haven't had a vehicle depart to be able to see our 3 alpha and 4 alpha IROSA arrays on there. But we currently have 4 IROSAs on board. They're supplying about 9 kilowatts of power, which is going towards a lot of payloads in science. We have the mod kit assembled on 1 Bravo. We have a little bit of work we need to do on that in order for it to be able to receive an IROSA, and we're going to be going out on 1 Alpha, so we'll be out on the S4 to S6 trusses. So with that, the nice thing with these mod kits is we're not constrained regarding when we need to be out the door, when we need to start working on this. So this is just getting the platform ready. So we have a heavy timeline with a lot of work going on, but we're not constrained to eclipses and installations, so when the sun rises and sun sets. So we can get out the door. We got some flexibility working around our timeline and our plan. So what we're going to be doing as far as station is concerned to be getting ready for the EVA is we are going to park our SARGs, or our solar, our solar array rotary joints, and we will have to park 2 of our beta gimbal assemblies, our BGAs, in order to allow the crew to get out there to put these mod kits on board. We've got a couple power downs we need to put in place. We'll get that done ahead of time. And like I said, or what Dina said, the IROSAs are currently not on board. They'll be coming up at a later date, but this is really to get ourselves set up to receive these solar arrays. So I'm going to hand it over to Keith to talk more of the details. But again, what we're going to have is Koichi head out towards the 1 Bravo array, which is at the S6. He's going to start work there while we get Duke at the 1 Alpha. And she's going to start setting up our 1 Alpha mod kit, and we'll see where the timeline takes us. So Keith, if you want to talk the details, hand it over to you.
Thank you. Well, It's always a pleasure when we get to send out rookie crew members like we get to on this particular spacewalk. But it's especially good because it's all of Crew 5 now will have EVA experience, which I think that's a remarkable accomplishment because generally we have a pair of crew members that do most of the spacewalks. But in this case, we're going to spread the wealth across all of them and get Koichi a chance to get out the door. So that's invigorating. We also have a rookie flight director because this will be her first EVA. But the good news with that is that I have done so many that I make up for all of them. And I'm the crusty old EVA officer. This is our 6th mod kit. And the great thing about these EVAs, it's a lot like an erector set. We get to drive a lot of bolts, put linkages together. It all goes together so beautifully. It's fun, and it gives a chance for the crew to go out and drive a lot of bolts like construction engineers. So it's a lot of fun. Again, they did get a chance to practice this in the pool out at the NBL, which is a great platform for learning how to do all the activities where they need to translate, how they need to set up their work sites, what it takes to drive the bolts. This is also an awesome EVA for teamwork because you'll never see two people work together more carefully and concisely. They start out separated. As Chloe mentioned, Koichi heads out to S6 to start on the 1B truss. That's the one where we left the collar bolts not driven. So currently, that particular mod kit will not accept an IROSA. And then, in the meantime, Nicole starts building what we call the upper triangle, and that's the part of the truss that's going to get, or part of the mod kit that gets installed first on the mass canister. When that's ready to go and it's built, Koichi will come back inboard and join Nicole, and the two of them will start the assembly process together. So I have a video to show that's our VR lab animation with some narration over top of it, if you'd like to show that now. US EVA 84 starts with EV1 Koichi Wakata with the red stripes on his suit coming out the hatch first. EV2 Nicole Mann will be handing out a bag that has cables in it and a large bag that has the mod kit struts in it. Koichi will put the cable bag onto his body restraint tether and be prepared to hand the strut bag to Nicole as she comes out of the hatch. Once they're in position, Koichi will start his translation up the Cetus spur to get to the front face of the International Space Station to start his translation out toward the starboard part. He'll stop and attach his safety tether and Nicole's safety tether as their anchor point, and then continue on out the starboard truss. Along the way, Koichi will stop and drop off his cable bag. Once that's in position, he'll continue translating starboard. As he moves along the truss, he'll stop and he'll put down what we call a green hook, which allows him to go the rest of the way. Nicole will close the thermal cover. She'll have the MMOD strut bag on her body restraint tether and follow the same path that Koichi did. Nicole Mann will follow Koichi's translation path as she gets to the solar ray alpha rotary joint and gets to the 1A worksite. She'll stow the strut bag and restrain it in position. Once that's done, she'll make her way back to the crew and equipment translation aid attached to the mobile transporter and retrieve the articulating portable foot restraint with an extender. Once she has that attached to her body restraint tether, she'll make her way outboard towards the starboard end and her work site at the 1 Alpha Beta gimbal assembly. She'll install this foot restraint and position it for the work she's going to do shortly. Nicole will collect
part of what we refer to as the upper triangle, which is sections of truss that are part of the mod kit assembly. This will become the beginning backbone of the entire mod kit. These struts are put into position and bolted together. While Nicole is working on that, Koichi heads out to the 1B beta gimbal assembly and tightens 2 collar bolts on the right-hand side and left-hand side of the 1 Bravo mod kit. Koichi will translate back inboard and join Nicole at the 1A worksite. Nicole will translate over to the articulating portable foot restraint and ingress. Koichi positions the upper triangle and hands that up to Nicole. Nicole takes the upper triangle and drives 4 bolts to attach it to the beta gimbal assembly. Koichi hands up the lower strut and the mid strut, and then translates to get into position to install them. Both crew members work together to drive the bolts on the right lower strut and secure it in place. Once the lower strut's installed, Koichi repositions to install the mid strut. Again, the 2 crew members work together to get the right mid strut in place and drive the bolts which hold it. Once the right struts are in place, Koichi goes back to the strut bag and hands up the mid strut and the lower strut to Nicole. Nicole ingresses the foot restraint, and 2 crew members work together to install the left-hand lower strut. Once that's in place, they work together yet again to install the mid strut. Once all the struts have been put in place, they drive the final collar bolts, which rigidize the whole system in place. They put the multi-layer insulation back in place to cover up all of the metal components. Koichi translates over to the right-hand mid-strut and does the same collar bolts on that side. Once the collar bolts have been driven in place, Nicole can egress the foot restraint and start routing the IROSA cables. These cables will be installed once the IROSA flies up, the summer of 2023. Koichi then routes the cables on the right-hand side, and that completes the installation of the mod kit. The crew will then translate back and stow the articulating portable foot restraint, turn the strut bag to the airlock. In the meantime, Nicole picks up a cable, which is part of the DC to DC converter unit jumper. She'll install a cable at 2 different locations on the strut, and then make her way back to the airlock. Both crew members will meet back at the airlock, open up the thermal cover, They'll stow the bags that they'd taken out with them into the airlock. Nicole will lead back inside, and Koichi will follow. They'll close the thermal cover, and then the hatch inside, and that will end US EVA 84.
Okay, so again, you can see how the construction is going to go for this particular EVA. One thing that Dina pointed out was that we have a list of what we call get-aheads that can get added on or moved into the timeline depending on how well the crew is doing. And in order to install the IROSAs next summer, the main thing we have to do is put the platform in place and have it rigidized and fully bolted down. But what we hope to do to get ready for those EVAs is route the cables that go along with that. You may have noticed in the video that we plan to pre-incorporate the 1 alpha cables as part of our setup and translation. So they'll be at the work site, and our goal is to get them out and routed where they need to go. But if we have sufficient time and the crew is doing well and our suits are performing well, we have permission from the ISS program to run a little bit long in order to install the 1B IROSA cable. So our goal, in order to get as much done in preparation for the IROSA EVAs as possible, is we're looking forward to doing that particular get-ahead. And if we have permission, things work out in that plan, we may not get around to the S6 DDCU jumper cable. So we have worked on various plans, and the crew is aware. They also have the ability to tell us if they don't want to go do that, if they're not feeling up to staying out there that long to do the EVA. So we set it up so that we are in a good position if we're available to get that done, and it's very helpful. But we recognize that working in a spacesuit for that long is very exhausting, and this is their first time, so we want them to know and to be as comfortable as possible to be able to handle what we set out for them to do. So with that, like I said, it's a 6.5-hour EVA nominally, with the potential to run to 7 hours. Given that particular condition. So we look forward to getting the crew out the door on Friday, and that's all I have to say about that.
All right, appreciate it, Keith. And to Dina and Chloe as well, thank you all for those opening remarks. We're now going to open it up for questions. So as a reminder, if you're on the phone, please press *1 to submit a question and enter into our queue. Once your name is called, please state to whom you'd like to direct your question. And if you find your question has already been answered, then you can press *2 at any time to withdraw it. But let's go ahead and get started here in the room. Gina, why don't you help us kick it off?
Gina Sinceri, ABC News. This is for Dina. It seems like you have a bit of a spacesuit issue up there. I know they're mix and match, but are your if you have 2 spacesuits possible, I think the third is working again, does the crew have to be a similar size to mix and match and use those? I mean, how much an issue is the spacesuit shortage up there, or am I wrong in thinking there's a shortage?
Well, we always like to have redundancy, and so we had gotten down to 2 spacesuits, so we were, I'd say, we weren't in a good posture. So if we were to have an issue on the day of the event, then it could mean postponement of a spacewalk. We do have suit sizes, but we kind of take a size like it's called the hard upper torso. And so, for example, a medium or a large, you might be able to switch that out. And so when I say spacesuit, I guess I'm really talking about the life support system itself, but we have, the ability to change the size of that one. So we do mix and match, and it's not as much a sizing issue as it is just trying to make sure that the main components, the life support system, that we have enough of those on board. And we can change components out. So inside the spacesuit, I mentioned we have a fan pump separator, but we have other components as well. So if something fails in the suit, then we have that ability to also change those components out. I think it's just coincidence. The Orlans had some components that had gone out of life, and then we've had a couple of problems as well. So I wouldn't say, it's more of a string of events that have occurred. So it just sounds like we've had multiple issues, but I would say that we're still in a good posture. And in fact, my point I was trying to bring up was that we now we're up to 3 spacesuits, so we have a third one to make us more redundant, and then we'll get a fourth on SpaceX 27, so on the U.S. side. And then on the Russian side, like I said, they've brought theirs back up to working order again, and of course they continually bring up spares and change out components as well. So I wouldn't really say we're overly concerned, but we were in a posture where we didn't have as much redundancy as we'd like. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Keith.
No, I think we address when the crews get assigned what the availability is for the suits, and so I think the ISS program helps us out in understanding what the logistics are for suits and what hardware goes up. So I think Dina explained it very well. She used to be an EVA officer like me long ago, so she understands that aspect of the job very closely, but I think that's a good answer.
Wonderful. Thank you for the question. Let's head over to the phone real quick. Bill Harwood.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure who this is for, but I wanted to ask a question about the micrometeoroid environment. You know, the Soyuz gets hit, and it automatically makes me think, and it always does for spacewalks, what happens if a crew member ever got struck by a particle like that? Can one of you review for us how that would actually work, assuming that the astronaut's not incapacitated? How would the spacesuit work with a small puncture to get back to an airlock, and the contingency planning you guys put into all that? I just think that, given the hit on the Soyuz, that's a relevant question. Thanks.
Well, I can start, but I can tell you it's going to work its way up the table here as we answer your questions. As the EVA officer, that is something that I think very much about in preparation for any EVA is, what it takes to keep our crew members safe, what it takes to get them out the door, fully prepared for all the things that could go wrong. Chloe and I did a sim on Friday where we went through various failure scenarios to get ready for what it takes to get the crew members back in a circumstance like this. The suit is designed to accommodate, that's probably not the right word for it, but certain size puncture holes and yet still keep the crew members alive. The life support system is designed to accept, and then there's also protective outer layers that hopefully do what they can to prevent that from happening. But I agree with you that when the Soyuz took this micrometeoroid hit, I wanted to know if we could determine the size of that hit, because a certain size hole again can be accepted to the crew, and we'll get them back in. We'll get emergency messages on the suit, and the first thing we do is to speak with the crew, talk about what it takes to get them back in as quickly as possible, and we set up their translation paths and their tethering so that the route to get back in is the quickest possible. And with all of that, we are monitoring their suit consumables, and we monitor comm with the crew. So if something like that were to happen, we would find out right away, and we would start them on the path back to the airlock. I think we probably would all hear the message at the same time, and then Chloe and I would talk on the flight loop about what it would take to get them back. And then she would start getting the rest of the crew ready to accept getting this crew member in and back to site pressure as quickly as possible under that scenario.
Yeah, I think Keith answered pretty much everything that I had written down. But yeah, crew safety, we're going to be watching the messages. We'll see how the crew's feeling. We'll be monitoring the data in the suits itself. And from that, we can determine what the next plan is. Are we cutting everything off right away, or was it small enough such that we can take our time getting back and be very deliberate about what we're doing? Again, we have 2 folks on the ground. We have a person called a ground IV, which is the person who is talking directly to our EV crew members. And we also have another Capcom on board who is talking to our folks inside of ISS. So we'd have both of them communicating along a good open communication between the EV crew member as well as the folks inside, so we know what we need to do. We have flight surgeons on hand should we need to set up any other type of discussions that may need to have some privacy concerns. But we will first and foremost take care of that crew member with whatever happened. And like Keith said, we had a critical failure in our suit during our sim on Friday, and we practiced it, and the team is well versed in those procedures and those flight rules and understanding where we need to go from there. I do have other folks in the room who I can communicate with, who will be communicating up and out to people like Dina, Joel and Dana, and anybody else who needs that information to help with any type of post-secure, post-crew, knowing that the crew is safe plans from there on out. So you have anything to add about that?
Okay, I guess the only thing I would add was just that, we could talk about micrometeorites and we could talk about orbital debris. And for micrometeorites, we know when meteor showers are happening each year, and so what are the actual dates? So we have a mitigation there where typically it does not raise it up to a very high level of concern, but if you know that you're going to have a very like a peak of a meteor shower at the exact moment you're doing an EVA, you could reconsider. You can consider changing the time or the date. And then also for orbital debris, of course, we're tracking orbital debris of a certain size and larger, and we can move the station out of the way with the crew in advance of the spacewalk when we see that coming. So, but I think that this team has described very well what we might do during a spacewalk for such an event.
Wonderful. Thank you for the question, Bill. That's it for the reporters in the queue. So just as a reminder, please press *1 to enter into the queue and ask a question. I have one I wanted to throw out there just to give reporters time, just in case there's any last questions. But I did want to throw this one out to Chloe. This is not the first time that we've installed this mounting hardware on the International Space Station. We've had this type of EVA before. What are some of the lessons learned from those previous EVAs that are being applied to this one to ensure that it's the most successful?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is not the first time we've done this. This is actually the 6th mod kit that we've done, and I'll say it, you learn something new on every type of EVA, but I think one of the biggest things that we incorporated actually into the 1 Bravo, which is the last time that we did a mod kit, was being very deliberate in understanding how we monitor the number of turns on the bolts. The bolts on the mod kit are very sensitive, and we have to be very diligent in understanding how many times have these bolts been turned to make sure that they are secure and that we don't have any type of structure concerns. So I would say what we've done is just understanding how we monitor the bolt turns, how we pass that along, how we're very efficient in understanding where we're at, and knowing that we are in a safe config to continue to press on to the next one. So that's one thing that got incorporated last time, and we're going to do that again this time. And it's going to be a very, very effective way of communicating and proceeding along with the timeline to keep ourselves moving.
Excellent. Thank you, Chloe. That did spark some reporters to jump into the queue, so let's go to David Kelly with Discovery.
David Curley from Discovery, thank you. It's kind of a follow-on to that. This has been a process that's several spacewalks. What have you learned about the technology of rolling out these solar arrays, and have you come to the conclusion that this is the way to use solar arrays in the future?
Well, I guess I'll just say, first of all, I think that the hardware has been extremely impressive, and I try to also harp on that a little at the beginning, but when you see the arrays unfurl, and they seem to do so perfectly, and then provide power right away, it's really impressive. So I'd say that really this is proving this is a good technology. They're lightweight and flexible, easy to launch, and I do think this is a really good methodology, and we are planning to use it in the future. There are other types of arrays that other vehicles also use, so I don't want to say that those other arrays are not adequate for their function and use either. Just that I will say that this particular technology is proving to be a good technology for us.
Well, I'd like to add to that. When we installed the first set of IROSAs, the power generation of about just over a third of the original, maybe a little over a third of the original legacy solar array was contained within that IROSA. So the power generation, we need that step forward in technology and the capability to generate power. So it's always the right direction to be able to update and accommodate higher power capacity, higher storage, for all the use that we want to get out of station. So it's, I think that the technology is moving in the right direction, and we're able to use it, and that's thanks to the ISS program for pushing forward with that and getting it done.
All right, thank you, David, for the question. Let's go back to Bill Harwood on the phone.
Yeah, hey, thanks a lot. Just two quick follow-ups on the whole impact sort of scenarios. Dina, obviously, you can move out of the way when you see something coming, but there's, tens of thousands of things that are too small to track, and, micrometeoroids you can't track at all. So one question I had was how do you even assess that environment from a safety standpoint? I mean, I don't know even how you would do a probabilistic risk assessment since the numbers aren't known in a lot of cases. So I'm curious about how NASA views the risk of sending guys out in an EMU. And the only other question I had was I remember back in the shuttle days, they used to tell us that, the suits had a 30-minute emergency supply of air that if something happened, you could rely on and get back to an airlock within 30 minutes. Is that still the case? Is 30 minutes still the timeline to be back in the airlock? Thanks. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, let me address your probabilistic risk assessment. We do that, actually, and we do have experts that understand the micrometeoroid environment. All over station you have pockmarks, and we have got impacts, and we have folks that really do study that and understand that environment pretty well. And so, like I said, we're able to kind of look at, from a meteorite standpoint, at least when the meteor showers could happen. But we have all these mitigations in place, training of the crew, understanding, putting the tethers in a certain configuration for rapid bringing the crew in. We have all those mitigations in place, again, but for the reasons you state, Bill, which are, just that there is some uncertainty involved, and then we can't track everything. So, but we do the best we can, and I will say that, as I said, our experts do give us probabilistic risk numbers, the probability of impact on a particular day, and a probability of catastrophic impact. So we do have those discussions based on the environment's knowledge that we have and the models that we have. So. And then relative to the 30-minute ingress, again, this is the way we try to plan our spacewalks. Sometimes we end up, like with the IROSA EVAs, particularly in December, we had to take a look at it. Could take us longer, actually, to bring the crew in, greater than 30 minutes. The 30 minutes is a rule, like a guideline, and it's dependent on the hole size, and it's dependent on how much oxygen you're actually losing, how much oxygen you already had in your tank when it happened. So there's a lot of those factors that would go into your actual time that you have available in such a case. So again, 30 minutes is a rule, but then we assess it every single spacewalk and say, can we make it in 30? And if we can't, is it, I'd say, should we eat into the margin in order to accomplish that task or not? So we do look at that every flight. Do you have anything to add?
Oh, I was just going to say that when this particular spacesuit was designed, part of the design process and the constraints were what kind of margin do you design into something like this, and how do you accommodate for all the different failure modes that could happen on a spacesuit. And for that reason, that 30 minutes that you quote is based on a particular size hole in the suit. So there's really no way to know that the hole would be smaller or larger than that. It is just something that someone said as a requirement, here's what we're going to build towards. The 30 minutes is actually interesting because the space station is so large that when you are all the way out at the extreme, the way we will be on the CBA, we do very carefully think about what it takes and everything that has to happen to get back inside on time under that 30 minutes or rough estimates of what it takes to get back. So again, a lot of planning and preparation. We let the crew know. We talk through emergency scenarios with them. And we get everybody ready to go, but there's always risk. And it's just like any time you get in an automobile, there is always risk. But we need to be willing to figure out the safest way to do it, get ready for all that could go wrong, and that's how we do it to put our crew members in that position.
Very good. Thank you for the question, Bill. And that'll do it for the phone queue. So we'll go ahead and wrap up our briefing for today. So thanks to all who submitted questions, who asked questions, and of course, thanks to our briefers for taking the time to discuss the upcoming spacewalk. For Friday, NASA TV coverage begins at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 6 a.m. Central Time. The planned start time for that spacewalk is 8:15 a.m. Eastern, 7:15 a.m. Central. Thanks again for joining us. That will wrap up today's briefing.